A billionaire tried to destroy my career because he thought I was too poor to understand his secret language. Money buys tailored suits, private jets, and untouchable arrogance. It does not buy immunity from karma. This is the true story of a billionaire who weaponized a forgotten language to humiliate a humble coffee shop waitress, completely unaware that she spoke it as her mother tongue. My name is Chloe Morrow, 26 years old. Friday evenings at the Gilded Lily, a 3-Michelin-starred restaurant tucked inside the exclusive Beverly Hills hotel, operated on a frequency of controlled chaos. The air smelled of white truffles, vintage Dom Perignon, and the silent desperation of the ultra-rich demanding perfection. I worked double shifts to pay off my father's catastrophic medical bills. This golden cage came with a heavy price. The tips were life-changing, but the emotional toll of serving the fiercely entitled was slowly crushing me. I was good at my job because I possessed the one trait the rich valued above all else in service staff: invisibility. I knew how to appear with a fresh bottle of San Pellegrino the moment a glass emptied, and how to vanish before my presence interrupted a billion-dollar merger being discussed over dry-aged Wagyu. This particular Friday, the restaurant manager, a high-strung man named Derek, cornered me near the service station. His forehead glistened with sweat. "Table 4, Derek whispered, his voice trembling. "Sebastian Ashford." I nodded, keeping my face perfectly neutral, though my stomach twisted into a tight, cold knot. Sebastian Ashford III was a notorious figure in the Los Angeles hospitality scene. Heir to a ruthless real estate empire, Sebastian treated service workers with a cruelty that bordered on sport. He was the kind of man who sent a $300 steak back 3 times just to watch the kitchen panic. The kind of man who viewed an expensive restaurant bill not as payment for food, but as payment for the right to humiliate. With Sebastian that evening were his fiancée Sloane Whitmore, a woman whose icy smile and diamond-drenched fingers matched her inherited fortune, and Julian Thorne, Sebastian's closest friend and chief financial officer. They swept into the Gilded Lily like a conquering army, ignoring the hostess completely, bypassing the waiting area, and claiming the most secluded leather booth in the dining room. I approached the table, posture straight, white linen towel draped perfectly over my forearm. "Good evening. Welcome to the Gilded Lily. My name is Chloe, and it will be my absolute pleasure to take care of you tonight. May I start you with sparkling or still water?" Sebastian didn't look up from his phone. He simply raised 2 fingers and flicked them dismissively, the same gesture you'd use to shoo a stray dog. "Sparkling. Ice, but not too much ice. And send the sommelier." "I don't want to talk to you about wine," he commanded, his voice dripping with aristocratic boredom. "Right away, sir." I pivoted smoothly and retreated to the service alley. I breathed in deeply, grounding myself. Just another shift. Just another spoiled man. When I returned to pour the water, Sebastian, Sloane, and Julian were deep in conversation. But they weren't speaking English. They weren't speaking French, Italian, or any standard language of international business. They were speaking Ladine. My hand, hovering over Sloane's crystal goblet, froze for a fraction of a second. Ladine is a deeply obscure Rheto-Romance language spoken by roughly 30,000 people in the remote alpine valleys of South Tyrol, Italy. A dying tongue. Beautiful, guttural, melodic. A collision of ancient Latin and rough German. It was also the language my grandfather, Ezio Moreau, had spoken to me every single day of my childhood. Ezio had immigrated from a tiny village near Cortina d'Ampezzo in the 1960s. He worked his fingers to the bone as a carpenter in San Diego. He taught me Ladine as our special secret, a way to stay connected to a homeland he would never see again. To me, Ladine was the language of warm hearths, of folk songs sung over hot cocoa, of deep, unconditional, fierce family love. Hearing it slither from Sebastian Ashford's lips was like watching someone spit on a grave. I kept pouring. My face remained a mask of absolute professional indifference. I listened. "Look at the shoes she's wearing," Sebastian said in flawless, slightly accented Ladine. He didn't lower his voice. He leaned back against the plush leather, making direct eye contact with me as he spoke. "Scuffed at the toes. You can smell the poverty on her. It's absolutely tragic that places like this let the peasants walk so close to the tables." Sloane let out a high, tinkling laugh, the sound of breaking glass. "Darling, don't be cruel," she replied in the same obscure dialect. "She's probably saving up for a fake Louis Vuitton. Give the little ant some grace." "I give grace to things that matter," Sebastian shot back. Julian swirled his scotch. "These people are just background noise, Sloane. They don't hear. They don't see. They just fetch." I finished pouring the water. My pulse thundered in my ears, a violent, staccato rhythm against my eardrums. I understood immediately. Sebastian and his Ivy League friends had spent winters skiing in Cortina. They had picked up the local dialect, not out of respect for the culture, but to use it as a weaponized secret code, to mock, degrade, and belittle the people serving them. Secure in the absolute certainty that no working-class waitress in Los Angeles could possibly understand a dying Italian mountain dialect. They thought I was deaf to their cruelty. I placed the water pitcher down. I looked Sebastian directly in the eyes, and smiled. Warm. Radiant. Utterly hollow. "I will send the sommelier over immediately, sir. Please let me know if there is anything else you require." I walked away. My spine was forged of absolute steel. I was not going to cry. I was not going to break. The shift had just begun. And if Sebastian Ashford wanted to play a game of secrets, I was more than ready to let him dig his own grave. As the evening wore on, the Gilded Lily reached a fever pitch of culinary choreography. Waiters darted between tables with silver cloches. The soft murmur of wealthy patrons provided a steady baseline to the clinking of heavy cutlery. But at table 4, the atmosphere was toxic. I moved in and out of their orbit, serving the first course, a delicate seared foie gras with blackberry reduction. Every time I approached, Sebastian took it as an opportunity to practice his vile brand of Ladine comedy. "Careful, Julian," Sebastian said smoothly in the Alpine tongue, watching me carefully set the Limoges porcelain plates down. "Don't let her breathe on your food. Who knows what public transit diseases she's carrying." "Look at her hands. Rough as sandpaper," Sloane added in Ladine, picking up her fork and inspecting it for imaginary dirt. "Honestly, Sebastian, she looks like she hasn't slept in a week. They really should enforce a stricter grooming standard here." My jaw tightened, but I forced my facial muscles to remain entirely slack. I focused on the mechanical movements of my job. Left side to serve, right side to clear. I retreated to the shadows near the wine cellar. My heart burned with a quiet, furious inferno. My grandfather's language, the beautiful words he used to tell me stories of snow-capped mountains and alpine ibex, was being dragged through the mud by people whose souls were bankrupt. But then, as the main courses arrived, the conversation shifted. From petty insults directed at me to something much darker, much more dangerous. I approached to pour a vintage Bordeaux, a bottle that cost more than my rent for 3 months. As the crimson liquid flowed into crystal glasses, Sebastian leaned close to Julian, and he kept speaking Ladine. "The zoning board is entirely in my pocket," Sebastian murmured, taking a sip of wine and nodding in approval. "That Inspector Hayes, I wired $60,000 to his offshore account this morning. The Marina Development Project is greenlit. We start demolishing the low-income housing on the waterfront by next Tuesday." Julian chuckled, a dry rasping sound. "And the board of directors? What about your father? If he finds out you bypassed the environmental review by bribing a city official, he'll strip you of your shares." "The old man is a dinosaur," Sebastian scoffed in Ladine, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. "He's stepping down in 6 months anyway. By the time anyone realizes the soil on that waterfront is toxic, the condos will be built, sold to foreign investors, and I'll be completely insulated. The city will be stuck holding the bag." My hand trembled, just fractionally. I wasn't just listening to the cruel ramblings of a spoiled billionaire anymore. I was standing 1 foot away from a confession to massive federal crimes: bribery, real estate fraud, environmental negligence. Sebastian was laying out his entire criminal enterprise in a crowded restaurant, completely shielded by his arrogance and a language he believed was his private domain. "And Sloane?" Julian asked in Ladine, glancing at the woman currently focused on her phone. "She still doesn't know about the prenup loophole?" Sebastian smirked, looking at his fiancée with a chilling lack of affection. She thinks she gets half if I walk away. She doesn't realize my lawyers buried a clause on page 82 that ties her payout to a holding company in the Caymans that I'm actively bankrupting. If she ever gets boring, he shrugged, I can drop her. She'll leave with nothing but the jewelry she's wearing. I stepped back, taking the empty wine bottle with me. The absolute sociopathy on display was staggering. Sebastian Ashford was betraying everyone. The city, his father, his business partners, the woman sitting right next to him. I walked back to the kitchen, feeling a strange mix of nausea and profound clarity. 10 minutes later, I was preparing to bring out truffle-infused fingerling potatoes. Through the porthole window of the kitchen door, I watched table 4. Sebastian held up a single long, dark hair, clearly belonging to Sloane, whose brunette extensions draped over the collar of her designer coat. He laughed, speaking rapidly in Ladine. I read his lips. Watch this. Sebastian carefully placed the hair directly onto the center of his medium-rare ribeye. I'm bored. Let's have some fun with the peasant. I'm going to make a massive scene, get this entire $1,000 meal comped, and demand that the manager fire her on the spot. It's always amusing watching them beg for minimum wage. Sloane giggled. Julian smirked and raised his glass in a toast to Sebastian's cruelty. I felt the blood drain from my face. This wasn't about enduring verbal abuse anymore. This man was actively plotting to destroy my livelihood, for the sheer entertainment of watching me suffer. If I lost this job, my father's treatment would stop. We would be evicted. Sebastian was playing with my life like a cheap toy. I turned sharply and walked into the manager's office. Derek was looking over the nightly receipts, stressed. Derek, we have a problem at table 4. I said, my voice eerily calm. Derek's head snapped up. What? What did you do? I told you. Sebastian Ashford is a VIP. His family owns half the commercial real estate on this block. I didn't do anything, I replied steady. But Sebastian Ashford just planted a hair from his fiancée's head onto his steak. He's about to call you over, demand the meal be comped, and demand that you fire me. I'm warning you before he does it. Derek paled. He stood up, pacing behind his small desk. Are you sure? How could you possibly know that? I heard him say it. Look, Chloe, Derek stammered, refusing to meet my eyes. If Mr. Ashford says there's a hair in his food, there's a hair in his food. We comp the meal. It's standard procedure. We can't accuse him of lying. And the part where he demands you fire me? I pressed. Derek looked at the floor. You can take the rest of the week off. Well, we'll talk about your future here on Monday. I have to protect the restaurant, Chloe. I'm sorry. You know how powerful these people are. I stared at him. In that moment, I understood the devastating truth. The rules did not apply to men like Sebastian. The system was designed to protect them, to coddle their worst impulses, and to sacrifice people like me without a second thought. Derek was too terrified of losing his own job to stand up for me. I was entirely alone, but as the fear washed over me, it was replaced by something else. Something hot, sharp, brilliantly clear. The memory of my grandfather, a man who built a life with his bare hands, a man of profound dignity who bowed to no one. I didn't need Derek's permission to defend my own dignity. Never mind, Derek, I said quietly. I'll handle table 4. Before the manager could protest, I grabbed my silver serving tray, squared my shoulders, and walked out of the kitchen doors. The dining room lights caught the determination in my eyes. I marched directly toward the VIP booth, where Sebastian Ashford was just raising his hand, mouth open, preparing to shout for a manager. He was expecting a terrified, subservient waitress. He had no idea what was about to hit him. Sebastian's right arm was fully extended, fingers snapping sharply to summon Derek. He had already inhaled deeply, expanding his chest to project his indignation across the hushed, elegant dining room. I intercepted him before a single syllable left his mouth. I stepped squarely into his line of sight, placed the silver tray of truffle fingerling potatoes onto the center of the table with a soft, definitive clink. My movements were unnervingly precise. I did not bow my head. I did not offer the subservient, frightened smile he was anticipating. Instead, I stood perfectly upright, my dark eyes locking onto his with the intensity of a predator assessing a trapped mouse. "Is there an issue with your ribeye, Mr. Ashford?" I asked in English. My voice was calm and remarkably loud. Loud enough that wealthy patrons at adjacent tables paused their conversations, attention magnetically drawn to the brewing conflict. Sebastian dropped his hand. His upper lip curled into a sneer. "An issue," he barked. "Yes, there is an absolute disaster on this plate. Look at this, a massive, dark hair tangled right in the center of my wagyu. This is utterly repulsive. The Gilded Lily is supposed to have standards, yet they let filth like you handle the food. I want the manager right now, and I want you out of my sight. You're fired." Julian leaned back, crossing his arms with a smug, expectant smirk. Sloane sighed dramatically, picking up her phone, distancing herself from the unpleasantness of dealing with the lower class. I looked down at the steak, looked at the hair, then looked at Sloane's long, brunette extensions. When I finally spoke, the air in the restaurant seemed to turn to ice. I did not speak in English. I did not speak in French. I spoke in Ladine. "That is a very beautiful hair, Sebastian," I said, my accent flawless. My pronunciation carried the raw, guttural melody of the South Tyrolean valleys. "But we both know it belongs to Sloane. I watched you pull it from her coat 10 seconds ago and place it on the meat." The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Sebastian's sneer vanished, replaced by sheer, unadulterated shock. All the blood rushed from his face, leaving his skin the color of old parchment. His jaw dropped. He stared at the woman in the cheap black uniform, his brain violently short-circuiting as it tried to process the impossible. Julian's smug smile slid off his face like wet clay. He choked on his own saliva, coughing into his napkin. Sloane's head snapped up from her phone. Her perfectly threaded eyebrows shot toward her hairline. "What?" Sebastian stammered in English, his voice a pathetic, reedy whisper. He was trembling. The impenetrable armor of his wealth had just been shattered by a single sentence. "What did you just say?" I leaned closer, resting my palms on the edge of the mahogany table. I wasn't finished. I was going to burn his entire world to the ground. In the language of my grandfather. "I said you are a liar," I continued in Ladine, slipping into a harsher, more commanding register. "I also said that my shoes may be scuffed and my hands may be rough, but my soul is not rotting inside my chest like yours." Sebastian tried to speak, tried to assert his dominance. His vocal cords refused to cooperate. He was completely paralyzed by the terror of exposure. I turned my gaze to Sloane. The other woman looked terrified, realizing the peasant had understood every cruel joke they'd made all evening. But I had a much bigger prize in mind than petty revenge. "He does not love you, Sloane," I said softly in English, so the surrounding tables could hear the poison spilling over. Then, to ensure Sebastian felt the true agony of his arrogance, I switched back to Ladine for the fatal blow. "Page 82 of your prenuptial agreement. He tied your entire payout to a Cayman Islands holding company that he is actively bankrupting. If he leaves you, you get absolutely nothing. He bragged about it while I poured your Bordeaux." Sloane gasped. Her hands flew to her mouth. She whipped her head around to look at Sebastian. "Sebastian, what is she talking about? Is that true?" Sebastian was hyperventilating. His eyes darted frantically around the room. The adjacent tables were completely silent now, listening intently to the elite soap opera unfolding at table 4. I leaned directly into Sebastian's personal space. My voice dropped to a cold whisper, still in Ladine. "And as for your little real estate venture, bribing Inspector Hayes with $60,000 to approve a toxic waterfront site, demolishing low-income housing on poisoned soil." I paused. "It's a fascinating strategy. I wonder how the Federal Bureau of Investigation will feel about your offshore wire transfers." Julian stood up abruptly. His chair scraped violently against the hardwood floor. "We are leaving," he panicked, eyes wide with the realization that they had just confessed to federal felonies in front of a witness. "Sebastian, get up right now." But Sebastian couldn't move. He was staring at me as if I were a ghost. A demon summoned from the Italian Alps specifically to destroy him. "Who?" he breathed, completely broken. "Who are you?" I stood up straight, smoothed my apron. My name is Chloe Morrow. My grandfather was Ezio Morrow, from Colfosco in South Tyrol. He built this city with his bare hands while your family stole from it. I reached behind my neck and untied the knot of my apron. And for the record, Sebastian, I switched to crystal clear English, ensuring every single patron in the dining room heard my final verdict. You don't have to fire me, because I wouldn't serve a pathetic, corrupt, cowardly little boy like you if my life depended on it. Sloane Whitmore didn't wait for Sebastian. She grabbed her diamond-studded clutch, threw her glass of vintage Bordeaux directly into Sebastian's lap, and stormed out of the restaurant, her heels clicking furiously against the marble floor. I tossed my folded apron onto the center of the table, right next to the contaminated Wagyu steak. I turned my back on the ruined billionaire and walked out of the dining room. No one stopped me. Even Derek, the manager, stood frozen by the hostess stand, utterly speechless. Walking out of the Gilded Lily into the cool Beverly Hills night air was the most liberating experience of my life. But I knew the battle wasn't over. Sebastian Ashford was a wounded animal with limitless resources. And wounded animals lash out. If I simply went home, he would use his money to bury me, to discredit me, or worse. I needed a shield, and I needed an offensive strike. Sitting on a bench on Santa Monica Boulevard, adrenaline coursing through my veins, I pulled out my smartphone. I didn't call the police. Local precincts were too easily swayed by Ashford family lawyers. Instead, I opened my browser and searched for the United States Securities and Exchange Commission whistleblower office. Then I searched for Marcus Webb, a notoriously aggressive investigative journalist for the Los Angeles Times who had built his career taking down corrupt developers. I drafted a meticulous, detailed email to Webb. I outlined exactly what I had heard. Inspector Hayes. The exact amount of the bribe, $60,000. The specific Marina waterfront project. The toxic soil cover-up. The use of offshore Cayman accounts. I noted the time, the date, and the fact that Julian Thorne, CFO of Ashford Properties, was a direct witness to the confession. I hit send. The ensuing fallout was not a scandal. It was an absolute financial massacre. Marcus Webb did not ignore the email. The level of specific detail I provided allowed him to pull public zoning records, cross-reference offshore shell companies, and corner Inspector Hayes. Hayes, a weak-willed bureaucrat terrified of federal prison, folded in less than 48 hours. He confessed to accepting the wire transfer from Sebastian Ashford's shell company. 3 days after the incident at the Gilded Lily, federal agents raided the corporate headquarters of Ashford Properties. Sebastian Ashford III was arrested in the lobby of his luxury penthouse building, handcuffed in front of his wealthy neighbors. His face splashed across the front page of every major newspaper in the country. The charges were staggering: wire fraud, bribery of a public official, and conspiracy to commit environmental crimes. His father, Preston Ashford II, a ruthless patriarch who valued the family name above all else, immediately convened an emergency board meeting. Sebastian was stripped of his shares, removed from his position as CEO, publicly disowned by the corporation to save the stock price. Sloane Whitmore, true to my warning, hired the most vicious divorce attorneys in Los Angeles. She used the public scandal to invalidate the prenup on grounds of fraud, securing a massive settlement before Sebastian's assets could be entirely frozen by the federal government. And me? The universe rewarded my courage in a way I never anticipated, because my information directly led to the SEC uncovering massive corporate fraud and the halting of a deeply illegal real estate development. I officially qualified for the SEC Whistleblower Reward Program. It took 8 months of legal red tape, depositions, anxious waiting. But when the dust finally settled, and the fines were levied against Ashford Properties, I received a percentage of the recovered penalties. The check was for $2.4 million. I paid off my father's medical debts in a single afternoon. I moved us out of our cramped apartment and bought a beautiful, sunlit house in the hills above Malibu, far away from the toxic hustle of the service industry. One quiet Sunday morning, sitting on my new porch with a cup of hot coffee, I looked out at the rolling hills. They weren't the snow-capped peaks of the Dolomites, but they were peaceful. I smiled, thinking of my grandfather Ezio. He had left me nothing in terms of financial wealth, but he had given me a secret weapon, a beautiful, dying language that I had used to slay a dragon. Money can buy many things: tailored suits, private jets, untouchable arrogance, but it can never buy the absolute power of knowing exactly who you are and exactly where you come from. And it certainly cannot buy immunity from a waitress who refuses to stay invisible. If you love this story of karma, justice, and the ultimate payback, hit that like button right now. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that arrogance always has a price. And don't forget to subscribe for more amazing true life drama every single week. Drop a comment below. What would you have done if you were in Chloe's shoes? If you've ever been underestimated by someone who thought they were above you, take this as your sign. The language of your grandmother, the skills from your father, the stories your family whispered when no one else was listening. Those are your weapons. Keep them close. And when the moment comes, do not hesitate. See you in the next story.